All of the sort of preliminaries that you know about, and if you have other questions. Next year, by the way, is a big year. So next year, the entire year, we're going to be noting the 50th anniversary of the Armenian Studies program at Fresno State. And many of you know the history that in the early 1960s, Richard Hovhannisyan was teaching here, and then Dr. Louise Nalbandian was teaching in the history department. She really started the program in the sense of teaching history courses. And then Serpili taught language courses. Aravakian came through, and other people came through. After Dr. Nalbandian's tragic death in 1974, there was a pause in the program for about 2 to 3 years, and then Professor Kyumjin was hired. So that's where we're starting the 50th anniversary, because then the program became sort of formalized and continuous. He started in 1976-77, so that's the 50th anniversary. I joined him as permanent faculty in 1985 and have been here since 1985. So 50 years of activity. So we're going to highlight that in our newsletter and have some activities, and then we'll culminate in the spring with our banquet and probably other activities. Just again, looking at that 50 years of Armenian studies in California at Fresno State, and looking at Armenian studies throughout the United States. And I'm the president of the Society for Armenian Studies, so I do know about what's happening in Armenian studies. I just want to say that our program is one of the more active and does engage students and community. So thank you again for your participation. So very brief introductions tonight. We're welcoming Dr. David Zakarian and Marianna Asatryan. As you can see on the screen, they're going to be speaking and performing about Armenian Sharakans. We'll learn about the origins, development, and the tradition of the Sharakans. Dr. Zakarian is the Haig and Isabel Berberian Professor of Armenian Studies at Fresno State. This is his second year that he's completing. He holds his DPhil in Oriental Studies from the University of Oxford, and his thesis was on the representation of women in early Christian Armenian texts. And you've seen him here frequently giving talks about various aspects of Armenian culture, manuscript tradition, the women in the text, etc. He is the author of several books and a forthcoming book as well that we'll be talking about next fall when it's published. Marianna Asatryan is an educational assessment specialist, and she's currently head of outreach and selection at the Ellison Institute of Technology at the University of Oxford. She and David are married, so this is not a live team tonight. We welcome Marianna to Fresno State. She's been here before, and we hope that she'll be staying longer very soon. But she is an accomplished singer, and she sings and is the assistant conductor at the St. Yeglishe Armenian Church in London. And she's also a member of the London Armenian Opera, where she's performed in major productions such as Armen Tigranian's David Beg in 2015 and Anush Opera in 2022. And she's also the founder and director of the Oxford Armenian Choir, which brings together students and faculty of the Oxford community who share a passion for Armenian folk and sacred music. So I'd like to welcome Dr. David Zakarian and Marianna Asatryan. Welcome.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Dermugradisyan, for your kind introduction, and thank you very much for coming to our final event of this year, of this academic year. It is a pleasure to see you all here. I know most of you are here because you want to hear Marianna singing, but it's okay. I will speak a little bit in between and give you the context of the tradition of sacred hymns and how they started, the origins and the development, and how it is reflected today in the Armenian Church. And I hope that it will be informative and insightful for you.
I also want to thank Professor Barlow for inviting me here to be part of this presentation, and to the community, and it's my absolute pleasure to be part of the Armenian Studies program session here. So while David will focus on the origins and the history of Sharakans, I'm going to try to give you some flavor of the beautiful melodies that Sharakans represent and the richness of their lyrics. And as you know, the Sharakans, these hymns, are preserved until today. They are sung in Armenian churches. Some of them are integral part of the Armenian Divine Liturgy, others are sung on special occasion days. And these Sharakans, they have been through this development of choral arrangements. Nowadays they are sung in 3-4 parts, usually accompanied by an organ. And there are notable arrangements by Komitas Vartabed and Yekmalyan from late 19th to early 20th century. But today, since my choir is back at Oxford and David can't sing, so I am going to present this a cappella, just one voice, soprano only, kind of in an attempt to evoke that feeling of how these were written in their and sung in Armenian monasteries in their original raw form.
So, why talk about Sharakan? So here you could see one of the pages of the Armenian Sharakan, one of the very first books that was printed in 1664, so approximately 152 years after the publication of the first Armenian book. So in Amsterdam, Wolfgang Yerevanci printed this beautiful edition. These are some other pages from there. And I need to say that the Sharak notes, the collection of Armenian hymns, is considered to be one of the most published and copied texts in the Armenian tradition, maybe the second one after the Bible. So the Bible is the most popular one, and then we have the Sharak notes, which is a collection of sacred Armenian hymns. Now, we need to understand why this is important and why do scholars study this from different perspectives. So, Sharakans initially appeared quite early in the Armenian tradition. And of course, everything started with Armenia's Christianization. When Armenia became Christian at the beginning of the 4th century, the church had a problem. We didn't have a script, we didn't have the Bible in the Armenian language, so everything was presented either in Greek or in Syriac language. And it was very difficult to spread Christianity. And this is why the early Armenian Christianity was very much influenced by Greek and Syriac traditions. 100 years later, Saint Mesrop Mashtots created the Armenian alphabet. This is the beginning of an era, the change that happens with the creation of the Armenian alphabet when we have a proliferation of Armenian texts. But most importantly, for the Christian tradition, it was the translation of sacred texts. So everything starts with the translation of the Bible and of the texts that were very important for the Armenian Christian tradition. Lots of translations happened from Greek and Syriac. And one of the texts that was translated as early as the 5th century was the text that in Armenian, as you could see the title, it says Saint Yepremi Churin Asoro Gatsurtk. So the Gatsurt of Saint Ephrem the Assyrian. So Saint Ephrem was one of the church fathers of the Syriac church, and this text was essential for the church. So during the church services, when the priests or the deacons were chanting the psalms, there was a response from the choir, and this response was supposed to explain people who were present in the church how the psalms were connected to the Christian tradition. So if you think about it, the psalms come from the Old Testament, and they are primarily focused on the Jewish tradition. So the psalms of David, as we refer to them, they primarily present faith from that perspective. Now, there was a need to try and add to these psalms some sort of explanation, some sort of bridge that would explain to people how these psalms were connected to our Christian faith. And these Gatsurts, the initial text that in Syriac they were called madrashes, these didactic hymns, were translated to help the Armenian priests during the church services. The Armenian word Gatsurt comes from the verb gatzel or kitz, which means next to or to attach to something. So they were attached to the psalms. And thus the Gatsurt became a very important part of Armenian Christian tradition. So they were actually the earliest form of sacred chants. They were performed during very important feasts, for example, Transfiguration or Nativity, or the Dormition of the Holy Virgin Mary, and so on. So during the most important feasts. And this is how it begins. These are short songs, initially consisting of 3 to 4 stanzas that were explaining and giving this Christian context to the Psalms. The Armenian word Sharakan is a much later creation, so to say. So the first time when Armenian sources speak about Sharakans, they speak about in the 12th century. So only in the 12th century, for the first time, we see this word. In reference to sacred songs, spiritual songs that we have in the Armenian tradition, different types of songs. So the word itself, we don't know the etymology. There are several versions. One of them explains, this is Asatryan saying that it comes from the Armenian word shark, which means a row, and akan as a suffix, so basically songs that were sung in a row, so after the Psalms. Another explanation is slightly more poetic. So shar again like a row, and akan from akan, which means an eye, but also means a gem in Armenian. So it's like a row of pearls because they were so beautiful. So that's another explanation. The most probable one, but still again it's debated, that it might have come from Syriac word shahra, song of vigil. Though people, some scholars claim that it's too late for a Syriac influence in the 12th century. So we don't know, but we know that we have the Sharakans, these beautiful hymns sang in the Armenian churches. Now, Sharakans had several stages of development. The first stage, we roughly say from the invention of the alphabet until the 7th century, and this is more or less a freely composed spiritual song. So the priests or the most influential figures, well-educated figures in the Armenian Church would write Sharakans, and they were primarily dedicated for specific feasts. So if, for example, there is a saint's day, they would write a Sharakan and they will dedicate that Sharakan in the memory of that saint, and that will be performed in the church on that particular day. And I will give you some examples later. The second stage starts in the 8th century. 8th century in general, both for the Armenian Church and for the world churches like the Greek Church and the Syriac Church, is an important period. This is the time when many things become standardized. So for example, in the Armenian Church, we have the collection of Sharakans and the genre of Sharakans more or less established already in the 8th century. And at the same time, for example, if you are aware of the canon book of the Armenian Church, which was created by Hovan Odznetsi, so that also comes in this period. And also we have the Book of Hours, the prayer book of the Armenian Church, again, kind of finalized in the 8th century. So it's a very important period when the genre becomes a more or less set, and then later on whatever we have is development around that settled status. And finally we have the third stage of the development of Sharakans from the 12th century onward, primarily because of the work of Cilician Armenian monks, the Catholicoi that lived and worked there, and in particular Saint Nerses the Gracious, Saint Nerses Shnorali, who wrote a number of Sharakans, and today I'm going to speak a little bit about him, and then you will hear a performance of one of his Sharakans. So the first collection that we know of Armenian hymns or sacred spiritual songs was collected in the 7th century. The Catholicos Nerses the Builder, Shinoch, commissioned this to Parsech John to put together a collection of sacred Armenian songs. And then later on, another Catholicos, Sahak Zoraporeti, adds to this collection. But the final kind of standardization comes with Stepanos Syuneti, a very important figure. His efforts were primarily directed at standardizing, making a more coherent structure so that it is easy for the Armenian priests in different parts of Armenia to be able to sing the same things, to know what to sing on specific occasions and on specific days. And as I mentioned, Saint Nerses Shnorali, who he contributed a lot to the Sharak notes, and many of his Sharakans form part of the canon of the Armenian Church. overall we have a large number of them. So some of these that managed to enter the collection, which is published, and when I showed you that book, that's one of those collections, the recent collections. So these ones were referred to as the canonical one. That is the ones that in the church they were sang regularly on different occasions. But those that didn't manage to make into that collection are referred to as the apocryphal ones. And they're also quite interesting because they were written by a variety of people, some of which were written by women. So unfortunately they didn't enter the canon, but I'm going to speak about women Sharakan writers as well, at least about one of them. Now, what kind of standardization happened in the 8th century? So right now, we're talking about 8 types of Sharakans that are used in the Armenian Church, but interestingly, they are also similar to the Catholic Church tradition. So this is why I used my colleague Haig study of these types, and I have included also the Latin of it. So we have these 8 types. So the first one, as you can see, is Ornutun, that is the blessing, and it is relying on the Moses' Song of Praise from Exodus. Then we have of the fathers, the Patrum, Hartz, Metzatsusce, Vogormia, Telhelknitz, Mankuk, and so on. So these are 8 different categories, which as categories they contain a group of Sharakans, sang at different times, on different days, and for different occasions. On top of this, we also have this book of our prayers in the church. So here I'll show you approximately what happens. So in the Armenian Church, we normally have these daily offices, right? So we have the night office, the prayers at night, the morning offices, midday offices, and evening offices. And depending on which office it belongs to, we, the Armenian priests, sing one of the Sharakans from each of these groups. And they sing it using 8 different modes for this. So it depends on the tone, how you sing it, what kind of melody you use, whether it is a joyous one or a bit more somber, and so on. So 8 different formats, and it kind of sounds quite complicated, right? So which one to choose for which particular day and what to do. So I was trying to figure out how this works, and I came across a book that was printed here in Fresno, and it is by a deacon of the Holy Trinity Church, Gregory Yeritian. And this is one of the explanations when he tries to explain how the morning office functions. So he says, the hymn of the fathers, Hart Sharakan, is sung at this point in the morning office. However, to find the proper hymn, we must turn to the calendar, first to determine the type of day, the tone of the day, and which verses are to be sung. Then we must turn to the hymnal book index and look for the hearts under the type of day. Then we may find the correct tone and verse to be sung. They may not be sung without first consulting the calendar and hymnal. Easy, right? So you kind of figured out how you need to find it. It's quite complicated, but some priests really know this very, very well. Now, we decided not to choose our Sharakans for today in this way because it was too complicated. And instead we're going to present to you Sharakans that represent different stages of development. And also, to be honest, the ones that we like very much, and I hope that you will like that too.
So, the first piece, is Zanjareli Lusomair, Mother of the Ineffable Light, which is attributed to Moses Horenatic, 5th century, is widely sung today in Armenian churches on Christmas Eve. This is a midday or Jashu Sharakan in the kind of types of Sharakan that David was showing. And Jashu Sharakans are integral part of the Armenian divine liturgy. So this particular piece, there are arrangements by Komitas and Marianna. I'm going to sing the one arranged by Komitas. Now I get my organ for a sec. Sorry.
You can see the lyrics, I should have mentioned this before, so you can see the lyrics here and the English translation. There is only one case where I don't have the Armenian because the text is a bit long, so only the translation. But I want you to pay attention to the structure of this particular one. I have highlighted the one line that is repeated here 3 times. This was referred to as the darts in the original Katsut, in the original Sharakans that we had. And the concept of darts is like, it's the same like the refrain in a song, trying to repeat the same thing to give the message to the people who are present in the church during the worship. So, and in this particular case, you could see that it is a reference to the birth of Christ sang during the Christmas Eve event. So this is one of, to be honest, we don't know exactly who wrote this. The attribution started to come in the 12th century and onwards. So, it was a normal thing to do, to attribute to some famous people in the Armenian history and say that this was, for example, written by Moses Khorenati. To be fair, we just don't know. But we know that this is a very old Sharakan, very old Katsurt. Now, as I mentioned, between 5th and 7th century, we have a more or less a freer way of writing and creating Sharakans. And though initially the Sharakans and these Katsurts, these hymns, were sang during a major festivities or feasts of the Armenian Church, for example, the Transfiguration, Christmas, Easter, and so on, then later on they started writing for specific days, for specific occasions. So one of the most famous one that we know was written by the then Patriarch Komitas Achzeti, who later on became the Catholicos Komitas Achzeti. And it was written for the consecration of this particular church, the Saint Ripsime Church, at the beginning of the 7th century. So those of you who know the story, Saint Ripsime with her companions came to Armenia, and she was martyred for her faith. So she refused to accept the marriage proposal by King Tartat, and for that reason she was killed, she was martyred, and she was buried in Armenia in Echmiadzin in Vaharshapat. And this became the place of worship for the Christians, because according to Saint Gregory the Illuminator, where on those places where the blood of these saints fell, this is a sacred land, and through these women Armenians were also blessed. And so at that time, the story tells us that at the beginning of the 4th century, when the Ripsime and their companions were killed, on their tombs martyria were built. And these martyria were not built of stone. We don't know exactly how they were built. Most likely it was of wood. But by the beginning of the 7th century, they were in a very bad shape. So Catholicos, the Patriarch Komitas at the time, sponsored the building of this beautiful church. This church is still functioning and is one of the most beautiful churches that we have in the Armenian tradition. And it is built on the tomb of Saint Ripsime. So in order to consecrate this building, they needed to hold a ceremony. And they decided, because the church was dedicated to Saint Ripsime, to have a day where we celebrate her. And for that particular day, the Armenian Church didn't have any hymns. And so Komitas wrote this hymn. And the interesting bit about that hymn is its structure. So the hymn itself is called Anzink Navirialk, devoted persons. The uniqueness of it is that he wrote it using an acrostic. So every stanza starts with a letter of the Armenian alphabet. So it consists of 36 stanzas, 36 paragraphs, so to say. So you could see the first 3 here, that the first one starts with Aip, then we have Pen, Kim, and then we go on to Ta, H, Za, and so on until the letter K. So we have 36 stanzas here. Normally not all of them are sang during Saint Ripsime's feast, which usually happens in June, so very soon we will have Saint Ripsime's feast. So this becomes a kind of trend in the Sharakan writing tradition, and many authors adopt this, and instead of having the Armenian alphabet, which was also still used, they decided to have also their names in the acrostic. And one such author is an important figure in the Armenian tradition. We unfortunately don't know much about her. but she is a prominent figure and we need to celebrate her. She's an 8th century Armenian nun who dedicated herself to serving God, and she spent most of her life in this valley of Garni, where she led this ascetic lifestyle. So we know about her from a historian, Stepanos Orbelian. So she was the sister of Stepanos Suneti, the man who standardized the Sharakans. And the story tells us that Sahagducht decides, well, initially she gets an excellent education in music and Armenian Christian tradition, and later on she teaches boys and girls in that valley. And the legend had it that because she was very beautiful, she had to teach behind a veil, because the boys would get distracted and wouldn't listen to what she was teaching. And she, unfortunately, we have only 2 Sharakans that she wrote and survived till today. And one of them is written in a form of a acrostic again here. Here you could see this is her name. So Sa, Hag, Ducht. Here I don't know what happens. So it's Ducht. So maybe this is how they pronounced it with aspiration. I don't know, to be honest, but it has the acrostic. And this is, as I said, becomes a common tradition. So many authors take this on and basically putting also their stamp on the Sharakan. So the next author who wrote a lot of this type of Sharakans was Saint Nerses Shnorali, whom I mentioned earlier, the man who developed greatly the Armenian Sharakan tradition, first of all because he was a prolific writer, a theologian, a politician at the same time. He was the man who was negotiating the union with the Catholic Church and initially with the Greek Church. Eventually nothing happened there, but he was also playing an important role in the Kingdom of Cilicia in Armenia. So he was the Catholicus of all Armenians between 1166 and 1173, and he's the author who has the most of the Sharakans in the collection of Sharakans. So the most famous ones are here, as you can see, the Son of Justice, Wondrous Crown Bearer, Noraharash Pesagavor, Govya Yevusavem, and my favorite one, unfortunately we will not hear that today, but I love this Nord Zavik. If you are interested, you can Google it, and it is the one dedicated to the resurrection of Christ. On that note, I will pass to Marianna.
So, yeah, I'm not singing Nord Zavik today, but I am singing Noraharash Pesagavor. So which is, again, a really beautiful hymn by Shnorali. It is actually a cantamos or nutun in one of the sort of types of the Vartanans canon. It consists of 10 acrostic verses, the first letters of which spell Nerses's song. So the first verses of the cantamos tell of the exploits of the valiant Armenian general Vartan Mamikonian and his comrades, and their sacrifice during the Battle of Avarayr in 451, and how they were martyred for their faith. So I'm going to, so this particular one is one verse only, and it is widely sung today in the Armenian churches on the feast of Vartanans Stom in February.
So, as Marianna mentioned, this was basically written in the 12th century. But you know the story of Saint Vartan and the Armenian War, when the Armenians fought against the Persian invaders when they wanted to reimpose Zoroastrianism in 451, and a group of Armenians decided to confront them and fight for their faith. So they were defeated. The Armenian army was outnumbered, and they were defeated. And according to Armenian historians, Vartan Mamikonian and 1,036 other members of his army were killed. But until the 12th century, we didn't have a day of celebration. So they were canonized as saints of the Armenian Church, but we did not have a specific Sharakan that was sang on that particular day. And thus, Nese Shnorali wrote this hymn, and this hymn is sang on a Thursday before the Great Lent. So we have that particular day when we commemorate these martyrs, and it is sang on that Thursday, just before the Lent. So alongside Nese Shnorali, we have another Catholicos who played a very important role in writing many Sharakans, many beautiful ones. It was the Catholicos Petros the first Ketadars. There are a lot of controversial opinions about this Catholicos because he lived in a very difficult time, and he actually agreed with the Byzantine Empire to abolish the Armenian Bagratid kingdom. He signed this agreement, and people hated that in the capital of Ani, but eventually this happened. So putting aside the political problems connected with this Catholicos, he was a very talented writer. And he wrote quite a few beautiful Sharakans. And from the list that you could see here, most of them were dedicated to the Requiem service. So I'm not sure why that happened, but this is one of the things that he's very famous for. And for example, some of this here might be familiar to those of you who attend the Armenian Church. For example, Iverin Jerusalem, which is sung during this Requiem service, usually when there is a Hokiangist, when there is a commemoration dedicated to the people who passed away. So this is done after the Divine Liturgy. But we're going to have another piece sang related to this particular author.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to sing Getater. It's a very complex piece. It is a part of the Requiem service that follows the Divine Liturgy. It's sung in Armenian churches despite its complexity, and the way it's sung today is the choral arrangement by a Soviet-era composer, Alexander Harutyunyan. So I am going to try to give you a flavor of how we think Getatarz wrote it in its raw form. And then at the end, also a little bit of presentation from what Harutyunyan added to the
Sharakan.
Yes. So.
So these were the 11th, 12th century when we have the proliferation of Sharakans, but by the 15th century the Armenian Church decided not to add new Sharakans to the collection because there were too many, thousands, and it was not easy to regulate, and as I showed earlier, it's pretty difficult to know which one to choose. But one thing that was sure, that they managed to make, to create the Sharakan for each occasion for 365 days a week and for different hours that these Sharakans were supposed to be sang, depending on what occasion was. And amongst those Sharakans, amongst this collection, we even find folk Sharakans. Sharakans that we don't know who the author is. And we definitely know that it comes from some folk tradition. And the one that we're going to present today is the Sharakan named Zakarian, like an incest tree. And here you could notice that this one also, like the very first Getsuk that I showed, has the dot, the refrain, where the main message is stressed several times. So most likely this is also one of the oldest Sharakans that we have, and it survived from the earliest period of Armenia's Christianity until today.
So this ode, one of my favorites, is devoted to the Holy Virgin Mary and is sung widely in Armenian churches today on the Assumption Day in August. So it's sung as part of the melody in the beginning of the Divine Liturgy when the curtain closes. And this piece has, as David said, we don't know who the author is, and it has got several versions. So I'm going to, they slightly differ from each other, and I'm going to sing like the most common, popular one.
Apologies for some typos. I just noticed when I was fixing it, there are some, in the Armenian text, there are a few words that are written together, shouldn't be. So this is another version of another type of Sharakans that entered the collection of Armenian medieval sacred songs. And because after the 15th century we don't have any new Sharakans that became part of the canon, it was quite interesting to see that in 2015 the Armenian Church introduced a new one. So for 500 years we didn't have a new Sharakan. And in 2015 it was decided to canonize the martyrs of the Armenian genocide. So, and if you canonize, if you have a saint of the Armenian Church, then you need a Sharakan that will be sang on the day of commemoration, dedicated in their memory. And this particular Sharakan, Herashatsan Pakutsman, was written and was dedicated to the Armenian martyrs. They became martyrs after the church canonized them. And it was based on the work of Archbishop Zareh Aznavourian of the Greater House of Cilicia. And it was arranged by Yervant Yerkanyan, became part of the Armenian tradition, of the blessing type, the Orthmitun type, and it is sung in mode 8. And if you were present here at the 111th anniversary, the commemoration event dedicated to the victims of the Armenian genocide, the Armenian clergy of different denominations came together and sang this particular one, and it happened also last year, and I'm sure this has been happening since 2015 when it was introduced. And finally, to end today's talk, we thought how we're going to sum these things up. And thinking about today's world and thinking about all these devastations and injustice that we witness on a daily basis and the wars, we thought that the most fitting perhaps would be to end today's talk with a prayer that is sung in the Armenian churches every Sunday, the one that we refer to as Lord have mercy. Because personally I believe the demand for peace, the demand for having some sort of justice in this world is very important, and everyone seeks that. And it is beautiful that every Sunday in the Armenian Church we hear the words which say, O Holy Trinity, grant peace to the world and healing to the sick, the kingdom to those at rest. So this is how we're going to end with this prayer. Thank you very much.